I'm going to start off asking people to come down the line, start over there, say who they are, and give a sharp, practical example of how something like this has meant something to them, how they have found a piece of information, or even maybe, as Maruba said, prayer, out of satellite data by means of AI. So we'll run down the panel, starting at the far end.
Hi, everybody. I'm Craig Brown, the Director of Investment at the UK Space Agency. AI is a really interesting topic for UK government, and we support many, many companies to develop AI-based applications and services in the space domain. We've recently invested in a company that is looking at using this in the agri-tech domain, and I would use that as my primary example.
Can you say a bit more? What is it that they're going to get out with the AI that they can't get out just by looking?
It's about translating large data sets, which we're used to dealing with, into actionable insights. So I think that that's the really key aspect of this, whereas traditionally you required a scientist or a person to provide that actionable insight, we can lean a little bit more heavily on AI in order to do some of that additionality.
Cool. Oh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Swatantran. I lead research on remote sensing and computer vision at Corteva Agriscience. And prior to that, I used to be a research professor at the University of Maryland. So I've worked on in the public and private sectors with satellite imageries for years. And the discoveries are I've been part of carbon monitoring, where you use satellites to estimate biomass in forests, or habitat mapping, and AI has been big there. And within the ag industry, it was predicting yield, getting better estimates of when to spray, crop protection, how to plan it, and make sustainable use. But I think that said, I would say we are just scratching the surface of using AI for imagery. We've been looking at the Earth for 50 years, but we're still wondering what is there and why is it there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Martin Langer, CEO of OroraTech. So we're a German company and operate the largest commercial fleet of thermal satellites. But actually, the AI story is more towards our clients. Our main case right now is fire, which was a low-hanging fruit, I would say, a huge problem, but also a huge opportunity to solve. And let's say we use AI along the full pipeline towards the customer. So we operate end-to-end. And when you look at the problem, it's about bringing information to the clients in very low latency manner with clients that are not familiar with space data at all. So what we've built is this pipeline that operates globally. So we analyze any fire that happens on Earth, have built the fire digital twin out of that, of the Earth, and can build models that we stream to our clients. The client, and this is my example, for example, commercial forestry in South America. We have 200 foresters right now using a fire progression model on their phones, which is based on AI, which they can run locally on their phones to study where a fire will go in the next 6 to 12 hours. And that's based on satellite data without them necessarily knowing that it's based on that.
That is an interesting point I'm going to come back to. I'm not going to discriminate against the online colleagues by having them come on at the end. So Andrew, if you could join us now.
Yeah, super.
Yes, so.
Great. Yes, thanks everyone. Sorry I couldn't join in person, but really humbled to be part of this panel. But yeah, Andrew Wilcox with procurement sustainability at Unilever. So a large consumer goods company. Seeing it through the lens of buying large volumes of agricultural and forest commodities. And my team has basically been looking after building geospatial capabilities that use remote sensing. And our hardest hitting, most established AI use case at this point has been around forest monitoring, principally in our tropical commodity supply chains. But, you know, I heard the original prompt was around, you know, what couldn't you just look at the images? But of course, the sheer volume of data coming in from satellites day in, day out, we really wouldn't be able to make sense of it and make decisions without without being able to distill those pixels. And so, we're actively looking into and developing use cases beyond forest monitoring, but that would be the example that I would highlight to get us going.
Thank you very much. Swarna.
Hi, I'm Swarna Kuruganti. I've been leading enterprise AI adoption most recently at US Foods, but even across retail and consumer product companies. So my views are my own today, and I'll be talking about the AI experiences across these industries, which actually have a similar problem. All of them face an immense pressure to be adaptable to changing preferences or needs, as I think the CVS executive also mentioned earlier. And multiple functions have to collaborate to be able to be adaptable, and AI plays a critical role, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in supply chain, whether it's in pricing. So some classic AI use cases is forecasting demand, marketing, content generation, adapting to changing needs in the market. Those are some.
And last, but very much not least, Iddo.
Thank you. My name is Iddo Salton. I'm a VP for Technology, Innovation, and Data for a company in the oil and gas industry, the Delek US. We have refineries, we have logistic assets. We use AI in its three main components, like machine learning, computer vision, and obviously like the entire world for the last 3 years, the Gen AI. Prior to my role in Delek US, most of my career was in the satellites industry, in variety of roles, from satellite operator to a customer of the satellite. So very happy to be here.
And tell us a little bit, an example of when AI has made something available to you from data that you couldn't have got otherwise.
So for today, for example, we have a drone program in Delek US. Similar to satellites in many aspects, I can tell you that we use computer vision algorithms in order to improve the efficiency, improving the way that we identify trends, anomalies. So this is something that we are leveraging more and more. And obviously there is the traditional machine learning aspect, that how you leverage data, especially operational data, and to make it more predictive analytics, to be able to identify issues while they are still small, before they become big. So that's something that we are also implementing in our company.
Thank you. Martin, I wanted to come back to something you said, which I thought was very interesting, which is the question of people not even knowing that the data comes from satellites. And that's also actually inherent in what Iddo is saying about, use drones where drones are appropriate. There's a tendency, I think, among people who see themselves as the space business, or as allied with it, to think, wow, satellites, cool. I think that there are a lot of people in this room who might agree with that. And yet, for a lot of people, the fact that a satellite is involved might even be off-putting. How do you deal with the fact that what people want is what Scott was talking to me about before lunch, which is they may not want to see anything, any sort of picture, they just want to know something. Is that your experience? And is there a sense in which the space industry can be its own enemy by saying, oh, look, you can do this with satellites, and you say, don't tell them about the satellites?
Yeah, 100%. And I consider us all to be in kind of a bubble. And it's a nice bubble. I'm a space engineer myself. I like to talk about satellites all day long. But most of our customers, they couldn't care less. They don't care about our satellites. They care about their problems. They want to have their problems being solved, and they want to rely on that. So they don't have time to analyze data themselves. They don't have time to deal with the complexity of space. And space is just another data layer. So us, as OroraTech, we aggregate all kind of data for them. It's not only space data from our satellites, it's space data from other kind of cells, but it's also ground-based data, weather data. At the end of the day, it's about the modeling and the outcome. And that has to be shipped in a manner that the barrier is very low, that they can really understand very fast what we want to tell them. Otherwise, there is literally no mean to talk about space data at all, or to integrate space data at all. And that's the job.
I think that's something that I can see. I can see people nodding about that space-based isn't in itself a selling point. However, the advantage of a satellite image, as was demonstrated many times, sometimes slightly wrongly, in the history of the Cold War, is, you can slap down a picture and say, "Look, you can see it. Here's the truth." If that's not how you're using space, if you're not doing it from the "I can see my house from here," how do you get your users' trust that what you're telling them really does come from is reliable? Because the great advantage of satellite images is you can show them and people say, "That's what it actually looks like." How do you deal with reliability and things like that? And not just Martin, anyone who has a question about how do you build up the trust to use data like this?
I can go first. I mean, we got the reality, and in our case, still most of our use case is fire, and the reality will tell if we were right or wrong. And obviously, we have to deal with that reality. And if we're not good, if the data and the information we got to our customers is just wrong, it wasn't good at all. So for me, it doesn't matter about proofing it with an image. Mm-hmm. Don't have time for looking at an image. We prove it with the model, with the outcome, and the reality will tell us and the customer if we were right or wrong. But I fully agree. Space data for me is the best layer that works on the entire Earth and the best layer to model all kind of products for us.
I know you were nodding there as well.
Nodding, and I think I'll add to it that clouds are the bane of satellite imagery. They continue to be the problem even now. So if I give data to the farmer or to the forest planner and I say, here's what it looks like, this is what it looks like, and make a decision based on it, if they cannot see it continuously, consistently, they're not going to trust it. Because it's you never know when it's going to get cloudy and when you're going to have a really good quality image. So that is getting that consistency, quality, in addition to analytics. So we're not only just showing images to give insights, we're actually running models and deriving things that cannot be seen. But to have consistency is important, and that's something we struggle with in the space satellite industry.
The companies that you've been working with also shown the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Ground truthing, fundamental. Making sure that you have that quality stamp of approval and calibration is fundamental to ensure that your customers have trust in what it is that you're doing for them and what you're delivering. But I think it's also really important to understand that the vast majority of high quality products don't just use satellite, they actually incorporate data sets that are taken from the ground, taken from the air. Satellite absolutely has its place, but very few high quality products, I think, are purely satellite only. It's about combining different data sets. And this is where I think AI really does have some strength, because it enables that combination of data sets in a way which doesn't require dozens of scientists involved in the loop. And it really does democratize the access to this type of data for end users and customers, really grows markets as a result of that democratization, just really opens up the customer base.
So when is satellite really necessary, and when is it one of a number of things and we're really talking about data products?
Yeah, so I think satellite really kind of comes into its own when you're looking at things at kind of country scale, county scale. So where it becomes really expensive to do something from the ground, or it becomes really expensive to fly planes or helicopters over a region. And actually the kind of scale that you get from a satellite is really useful and important. But also where you are using satellites to look outside of your domain of control. So, there's lots of kind of defense applications, for example, security applications, where imagery from space is fundamental because you just don't have access to the ground.
Iddo, you were talking earlier about drones. Is there a sense in which people say, gosh, satellite, but would be better off using drones for some of their data needs? And is that something that will eventually erode, or is it something that we have to keep in mind and see it as another matter of data fusion?
Exactly the latter. I think it's not a competition between satellites and drones. I think it's a combination. If you understand what are the relative advantage of satellites versus drone and you combine them together, I think that's the strength. And by the way, I fully agree with my colleagues that mentioned about the data sets. It's data sets from all perspective, from spectrum, SAR, IR, RGB, and this kind of bandwidth, but also with regard to height, to angles. So also satellites and drones definitely can be complementary to each other, as long as you understand what is the relative advantage of each. If you want something that you have a control, use the drone if you are able to access it. If it's something that you're not able to access it, use the satellite. And I think that also with the time to understand the changes and to do some kind of, you were talking about AI, to use some kind of change detection algorithms. That's something that definitely can help us gain the confidence of the users. If they saw what happened before, they see what's going on now, and they can see like a repetitive monitoring, that's something that they can really understand what's going on that front.
Andrew Wilcox, if I can come to you, and I realize that I can't catch your eye, so I'm going to have sort of like you'll have to be very alert because I may just come to you randomly sometimes. But where the idea of combining all these different sorts of data sounds in some ways absolutely the sensible grown-up thing to do. It also sounds like an immense headache because they'll all come in different formats and tell you slightly different things in slightly different projections at slightly different times. Is that a problem that a big company like Unilever that you run into, that the different data you're trying to make decisions on just doesn't fit together?
Yeah, indeed, and I'll be staying on my toes for you. But no, I think I agree with the panelists here. Of ultimately, the right combination of modalities will be a reflection of your use case, much as the right resolution will be a reflection of your use case. But indeed, I think any good data fusion and any good end data product is going to go back to, I think, a point that's already been made, which is the ground truth. And ensuring that the data that are used to train and validate the outputs of the models, because ultimately, unless you're interested in a out-of-the-box spectral index, like a vegetation index or something, you need to have a predictive model with its uncertainties and everything that goes with that. And I think my provocation to this crowd is I think our industry has always seen ground truth as a defensible moat. And I've got this great pot of data on agriculture or on forests, and that's what I'm going to build a business around. And I don't think it's necessarily an either or. There will be cases where your ground truth is a very important piece of your business. But I think if our industry started to complement that with the idea that actually ground truth is a collective good that kind of rises the tide for all boats, it could really help us unlock more value because it would lead to a better market function. Because at the end of the day, I am speaking for a soap manufacturer. So we don't really have such a direct interest in managing land. And so, a market that's working really efficiently would be one where many vendors can come to us with similar data products, and we as a off-taker of those data are able to effectively discriminate one to the other. Much like when we buy a commodity, there's a specification that comes out, and we're able to objectively check whether our suppliers have met that specification. Traditionally that would be a moisture level or impurity content. But I think a lot of that same logic applies into the remote sensing space.
I'm really interested in that notion, and I'm just going to ask if it strikes a chord with any of you. That notion of moving from ground truth as moat to ground truth as shared commons, and what, if anything, that means for building up applications. Is there a shared ground truth that moves well beyond any specific business case? How do you get into that issue? But you're making the mistake of nodding a lot, so I'm going to assume that you want to answer.
Well, there have been a lot of efforts in that direction, and I think it comes from organizations like USAID in the past, or NASA or Tetra Tech, or Radiant Earth. There have been these organizations that have taken it on themselves to create, or the Gates Foundation, create those repositories of data. I think they exist, but they are still in pockets. And my point to that is the way satellites observe the Earth continuously, they don't have barriers. They're continuous, they're watching everything. On the Earth, we have puddles everywhere. We have barriers everywhere. There are barriers in ground truth, there's barrier in infrastructure, there's barrier in how we want to unlock value and for whom. And I think these are the ones that we need to tackle to get anywhere.
Seeing a lot of nodding on that. Does anyone? Yeah, it's great.
So I think the kind of ability to prove the ground truth and the quality of your data becomes such an asset to a company as well. So once you've gone through the pain of demonstrating to your customer that your data is really trustworthy, then suddenly, everyone's going to want to use you, right? So I think going through that process of establishing that trust is fundamental to the success of a business, and we see that in across the industry. And I think leaning on the sort of expertise that you get by working with those partners, we have the National Physical Lab in the UK that does a lot on measurements, and they can help with their kind of quality kite mark stamp of approval for the type of products that you develop. The European Space Agency, extremely good at providing that kind of quality stamp of approval. And once an investor sees that that company has been through the quite rigorous process of a European Space Agency project, then that company that has gone through that process suddenly comes with that credibility, and it's no longer a moat or a barrier, but actually a real asset.
I'm very intrigued by that idea of trust, because, and it goes back to Andrew's point about moat versus common good. If you build up trust, you kind of want to keep it so that they trust you. It's hard. How do you spread trust out around the industry? Because that's what's going to, if people, is it something like a kite mark? Is it something whereby you can say, we are the sort of people you trust? Or is it something, because if it's something you have to work up company by company, sector by sector, that's going to be okay for the companies, but it's not going to give you a sort of like an explosion of usage.
It can just be as simple as the proof is in the pudding. So if you sell something and it doesn't work, then no one's buying it again. So in some respects, it can be kind of built up through kind of use and credibility. Just through kind of being right most of the time. Your GPS is often right when you kind of use it in the car, and so you learn to trust it. And I think that is also a way of doing it without necessarily going through that kind of kite mark process.
Problem with that is that builds up one by one again. That you don't get any sort of like shared sense of what it is to be reliable. Mani, you were saying about people. Tell us a little bit more about how you sell the information or distribute the information about fires that you gain at Onora.
So I think our benefit as a company was that we started with the product and then backward integrated to space. And I fully agree with what you said. This credibility, for me, it comes from two layers. On the one hand, obviously, there's ESA and other organizations that give you that credibility and the data quality itself. On the other hand, we've exposed ourselves very early to customers, to the market, really working with them out what they wanna have at the end of the day, what they wanna know, what really is the ultimate benefit that they want to see. Now, we deliver our data either through a front end for clients that don't have any operational means, which is, let's say, the minority, or through APIs where we just have a data pipeline that runs into the operating systems of our clients, which most of them have. And that can be as easy as active fire data, so to understand where active fires are. It can be advanced products like fire progression, fire risk, so anything that is derived from our database of fires. But again, it's about integrating where they are in their operations in a way that they just can use it as they operate, and understanding exactly the point in their operations where they need to consume that piece of information in which fashion.
So do you have to, and this question, is there an extent in which you have to sort of like train users as well? You obviously need to create the data, the knowledge, not data, the knowledge that they want, but do you have to train them in their expectations and how they work with you? For instance, for instance, we were talking about change detection, and I think change detection is a really interesting example of something you can do on a global scale with satellites that isn't very easily done otherwise.
Yeah.
But there's no point in detecting a change that people can't then act on. There's no point just detecting a fire if someone doesn't have an immediate way of responding to that. It strikes me that in oil and gas, maybe the sort of people who have quite good resources for acting on change detection.
So it's a very good question. I think there are two main things that we need to put in place. The first one is closing the cycle, closing the loop, like you mentioned. If you identify something, if you see something, if you understand something, okay, what are you going to do with it? That's something, that's the action that needs to be, make sure that is taken. But the other thing is start with the need. Sometimes, change detection is only a mean to get the result. If someone comes and tell me, listen, I want the change detection. Okay, why do you need that? Start with the need, what you are looking, what you are trying to understand. It starts even with the requirements gathering with parameters, angles, day and time, these kind of things. And then even with the collection, how you collect it, how you process the data, and how you create the insights. I think that the entire collection cycle with closing the loop with action, that's something that will bring the value eventually. And that's differentiate between the pixels that are stored, but they're not valuable, versus bringing the value. You don't need to collect all these peta of data in order to bring value, but if you collect a lot of data, there are good chances that you will be able to provide insights if you work in the right way.
Swarna, is that what you find at US Foods? That
Yeah, US Foods hasn't started working on this yet, but it's very interesting, following up on what Iddo said. Agentic AI, as you know, is another new type of AI that's coming into the market. It's very, very early stages. But in terms of acting on any of this data, just take an example of getting environmental intelligence about a heat wave in a particular locality. And someone mentioned that earlier today. If I'm a company that's selling beverages and water, for example, how do I trigger dynamic marketing spend to be able to push my product out there? Water is, everyone's selling water now. How do I be able to route my supply chain and make sure that I'm being able to optimize the right inventory spend to the right locations? Agentic AI plays a big role in acting on that intelligence. And that's just in the early stages, but the promise of that is very key, because at the end of the day, it's driving the outcomes that you talked about that makes any of this data meaningful. People are going to spend money on the data and integrating it only if you know that you're going to be able to sell more, or you're serving your customers in a better manner.
So do you have to make the ability to detect change fairly central to the way that you're...
Yes, exactly. And so one of the fascinating aspects of combining this environmental intelligence with relatively static enterprise data like ERP and CRMs is what will make this proprietary data absolutely a huge competitive asset for organizations. And that's just in a very early stages. We don't even know the types of use cases that'll come out of that combined data sets right now.
And where do you think, and this is to all of you, where do you think the key proprietary thing comes into? Is it in the data analysis, the sourcing of data, the data fusion? Where does the secret sauce live? No, I'll take your answer.
I'll take an answer and let someone else answer. But I think the proprietary asset is in the subject matter expertise of people coming up with innovative use cases once they understand the data, once they trust the data, and then they know how to apply it. It is mind-blowing, the creativity of humans when they are able to understand how to apply it to a problem that they have to solve within the context of their own business.
That's really inspiring, because I've been listening to you all and been fascinated, but I've been getting the sense of things that build up quite slowly because of shared trust moving out, because of fusion of data. But the idea that once you get that spark, that you can go around the cycle quickly, that you can see new things to do, that's quite different. I wanted to actually go to something, though, slightly different. Maybe we can find a way to link the ideas together. You would have been getting mic'd up and so might not have heard all of Mariba's rich and fascinating talk. But one of the things that he was stressing was epistemic humility, being able to know what you don't know. How do you find that people have an assumption that because satellites can see the whole world, they can tell you everything? How do you deal with that problem of things that you just can't answer, but people feel that they should be able to answer? I'm going to go for Martin because
I can start, yeah, because I think it's a lot of expectation management, especially if you deal with people or customers that are not familiar with space, which is the majority of the population. And I think our duty, our job is to give them a good explanation and a good understanding of what space can do and what it cannot do right now, but also project in the future what it might be able to do in the near future and mid-future. In our case, I always stumble about this understanding that a satellite is just a thing that monitors one place all the time. That's the expectation. If you have one satellite, you can just see this point on Earth all the time. That's just how people understand satellites sometimes. So they don't understand that a LEO satellite is rotating Earth. But if you manage that expectation and manage what the outcome can be with the data you collect, then they will understand what the benefit is. And to just keep it clear, I think space is that data layer we can build a lot of other things upon. We just have to manage the expectations.
It's very funny. Just to give a personal anecdote, I was talked to consult on a film quite some time ago now, and they're saying, what sort of satellite do we want to talk about when we're just looking at this same place on the ground all the time? So you don't want to be talking about a satellite, you want to be talking about a drone. And they said, oh, that's really interesting. So a drone, and I said, yeah, a drone. And I said, but we kind of want to use a satellite because they look cool. And I said, well, you can do that, but drones are your thing. Film came out, satellites, not drones. Though interestingly, 15 years later, people would have said, yeah, the drone is the more frightening thing. Are there any other things about? There's a question we have here from Slido, which I should have been reminding you all to use, but some of you are, so that's great, which I think gets at the core of what we're saying. Are the issues with unlocking the value of the data fundamentally technical issues or fundamentally business process, trust, innovation issues? Which, if you want more, do you just want more tech, or do you, I mean, it's to some extent a false dichotomy, but which is the thing that's in your lived experience more important, organizing the people and the knowledge or getting the technology right?
I can.
So it's like Iddo and then Swarna.
I would start, like always, with the people. It's all about the people, but it's in the people how they implement technology. Eventually, many cases, people think, and it's related to the previous topic that we've discussed, they tell about the solution. They decide, they are sure that they know what is the solution instead of focusing on the problem. What is the problem? What you are trying to understand? What is the business problem that prevents you to move forward? Once you understand that, that's something that the technology can be in help. Technology is only a tool for the people to use. If we use it right, we'll be able to solve many of the things.
Swarna, you wanted to come in there as well.
Yes, I mean, completely agree. And to add to that, just take the example of the heat wave in the bottle, for example, selling of water. In the case of a company that's selling water, if you have a situation where you need to spike the demand or be able to meet the spike demand of a product, you have to trigger your supply chain. Then you potentially, in an ideal world, would want to have dynamic pricing. So the information has to travel across all of this, and it's obviously being triggered by the environmental intelligence. If you think about it, there are multiple teams involved. You have supply chain, you have pricing, potentially product, potentially finance. Who owns the ROI of an initiative that is triggered by satellite data? And so it is an organizational adoption problem, in my opinion, because you have to be able to collate multiple teams, multiple executives, and be able to identify accountability to someone to be able to make this effort a success.
But it's interesting you bring in the market there and the and variable pricing, because to some extent the purpose of markets from this point of view is to pass on information. If you're getting the information, as it were, direct, how does that interact with your use of market information? And if you're using price spikes to understand the world, the ideal of the sort of things we're talking about is that there won't be price spikes because you'll be there already in time.
Oh, well, it's about the demand versus supply. So if there is a demand because there's a heat wave, it's just like Uber rides right now. They're not necessarily doing it with environmental intelligence, but if there is a particular weather situation, they do create surge prices. So pricing does play a role, I think, into the equation where you will have price spikes.
Not entirely happy about surge pricing during heat waves for water, but it does seem to me that the ideal would be to see it before. Andrew, we're running short of time, and it struck me that you might have some insight into some of that. But please feel free to say no if you don't want to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, one of the key insights we've had, I think, related to this is that often the data are the most useful when they're in the hands of our suppliers. And so I think to your point on, well, if you have all this data ahead of time, can't you smooth out the spike a little bit? Well, I think with a lot of this risk management, that's actually what a downstream user like a Unilever actually wants, is for the risk to be managed and pushed into our value chain, as opposed to something that we try to wait for kind of this mythical God view that ever higher resolution will give us to make kind of arbitrage type decisions, in a real-time basis. I think the more realistic outlook is to think about how do you build relationships with your trusted commercial partners so that you share some of this intelligence. And in so doing, also then share some of the value, as with any negotiation in a marketplace. But that is kind of one of the big unlocks is, engaging that value chain as kind of this federated multi-agent unit, as opposed to any one organization acting in isolation.
Right. So I think I'm feeling that the answer is beyond just it's complicated. There are sort of like patterns of complexity about moving the information to where it's needed to be, that sometimes are not within the purview of any individual company or actor. Does that mean that this will be that unlocking the value of satellite data really does require reorganizing organizations, asking different sorts of questions, doesn't provide any sort of, despite the immense sort of like cognitive rush you get when you suddenly look at the Earth narrowing in on a place, that this is actually something where we're going to have to go a little more slowly and learn things, but then in the end we'll get more than we ever thought. One of those things where the near term is always a bit disappointing, but the long term better than you ever imagined? Or is it all rushing in the next 5 years?
I would go for opposite of humble here. I think the time to act is now, because we have great compute, we have generative AI, and we have tons of data. It's breaking the silos. If we can break silos and bring together things together, data and people and ecosystems together, this is the time to act.
And can I just add that so much has changed so rapidly in the last 5 years, even in terms of the capabilities of satellites, the cost of access to space. You don't need to spend $50 million now to get into space, which is changing the kind of economics of space in this area. And I think one of the things that we try and do in the UK Space Agency is look more at kind of demand side interventions rather than just supply side. So working directly with potential customers, both from a business perspective, also other government departments in the UK, to try and educate them the new capabilities coming through within the space domain. And I think that is starting to kind of really bear some fruit as we're kind of preparing the ground for customers to kind of better understand what's available coming out of the space ecosystem.
Though I do think that brings me to what I'm going to use as the end of this discussion, because we've run out of time. But Iddo's great point about people people need to understand what their problem is, not to think they already have a solution. And educating your customers, there is a tendency, just the very geometry of it, there is a tendency in the satellite world to think top down, because the satellite's at the top and everything else is down of the satellite. But in fact, getting people to want to ask the questions, what can this do for me, rather than can this do this for me, seems to me to be a crucial step forward. But I really respond, Anna, to your point that this is the time when all this is available, and we should be doing our best. Thank you all very much. That's been a very rich discussion that I'm going to be thinking about for quite some time. That was really good. Thank you.